Let's rise for a moment of personal reflection. Thank you. May I ask Councillor Gardner to lead us?
Not a replacement yet?
We're not replacing you. We're just bringing in a diversity of talent, and you will continue to be the main gig, okay?
Please join in, everyone.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all thy sons command. Car ton bras sait porter l'épée, il sait porter la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Merci, Councillor Gardner. We acknowledge that we are gathering on the traditional territory of the Mohawk people of Akwesasne. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Mayor Bernadette Clément,
Présente.
Councillors Claude McIntosh, Elaine McDonald,
Present.
Sid Gardner,
Here.
Dean Hollingsworth,
Present.
Cataline Hébert,
Présente.
Councillors Maurice Dupel,
Present.
Glenn Grant,
Present.
Todd Bennett,
Present.
Justin Towndale,
Present.
and Councillor Riddick Bergeron sends his regrets, Madam Mayor.
Any additions, deletions, or amendments?
I have a few.
Madam Clerk.
The first one is to move communication number 1, the 2018 financial statements, to be dealt with immediately after the presentations on the same matter. Second one is an addition of bylaw to appoint lay members to the Election Audit Compliance Committee. And making our third change, renumbering our confirming bylaw to 2019-50.
Thank you. Adoption of the oh, Councillor Elaine McDonald.
We move number 7 from consent to communications. I just hope I've got the right one.
Human Values Day?
Human Values Day.
Yes. Is that the walk?
The walk. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, the walk,
please.
Madam Clerk. Any other additions, deletions? An adoption for the agenda? Councillor McIntosh, Councillor McDonald, all in favor? Disclosure of interest. I have one. So a bylaw has been added, you just heard from Madam Clerk, a bylaw to create the Audit Compliance Committee. And as that committee will be reviewing the issue of my personal contribution to my campaign, which I disclosed in public last week, I will ask Councillor Grant, who is the acting mayor for this month, to take this seat while that bylaw is discussed and or voted upon. And so that's my disclosure of interest. Any other disclosure of interest? Okay. Committee of the Whole. Motion? Councillor Grant, Councillor Hébert, all in favor? Adoption of the minutes for the meeting of April 8. Councillor Gardner, seconded by Councillor Bennett. All in favor? Presentations. Madam Clerk.
We have a presentation that is split in two this evening, Madam Mayor. The first part will be by our General Manager, Financial Services, Tracy Bailey. And after her turn, we have guests in the audience, Ross Markle and Jamie Pollock from NMP, who will continue the presentation.
Madam Bailey, welcome.
evening. Through you, Madam Mayor, this evening I will be presenting an overview for the 2018 year-end. Following my presentation, as the clerk indicated, the city's external auditors are here from M&P, Mr. Ross Markle, Mr. Jamie Pollock, to present the city's 2018 financial statements and the city's management ladder. In summary, the city had a general surplus of $1,571,003, a surplus in water of $186,059, and in wastewater of $299,971. At the last council meeting, a report outlining the variances to budget was presented to council. Council approved contributions to reserves as follows, and that was to working reserves for $224K, tax stabilization reserve of $987K, the winter control reserve of $300K, and the landfill reserve of $60K. The waterworks surplus went to the waterworks reserve, and the wastewater works surplus went to the wastewater works reserve. Other transfers to reserves were for our parking enforcement to the parking reserve fund, just under $50,000. There was no contribution to reserves for supplementary taxation. The city did not meet the 2018 budget, therefore no contribution was made. We were just shy of budget, though. We budgeted $400,000, and our actuals were just under $390,000. Our next slide is a comparison of the 2018 actuals to the 2017 actuals for revenue. On the right side of the slide, the variances are explained. The city collected in taxation $4.5 million more in 2018, and this was from a levy increase of $2.6 million, $1.2 million in growth, and a decrease of $789 in supplementary taxations. There's also a write-off where in 2017 the city was over budget, but in 2019 we were under budget. In 2018, the city received $2.6 million more in grants than in 2017. The increases came from our child care program at $2.9 million, paramedic services at $305,000, and police services regarding the court services upload of $144K. We lost funding in 2018 compared to 2017 for OMPF, and other reductions include social housing programs of $936K. The city has related increases in expenditures for social and housing services that are outlined in the following slide. You'll notice that fees and services were also higher in 2018 compared to 2017 by $1.5 million. The increase was in our water billings of $406K, wastewater billings of $603K, airport fees of $640K, the municipal accommodation tax of $423, and Cornwall area housing fees of $279. There were also reductions in tipping fees, recycled material, and city equipment rental of $226. Our next slide is our variances in expenditures when comparing 2018 to 2017. The city spent $1.7 million and $339K more in 2018 for social and family services and protection and health related to grant revenue it received. The variance in government or general government is an increase in legal fees and arbitration costs in 2018 compared to 2017 of $174K, and costs related to the municipal election of $160K. The city transferred $209 to the development charges reserve for the city's phase-in of residential charges. So that is our variances for expenditures. Our next slide is the summary of the city's capital fund. You'll see partway down along the right the total revenue of $19.4 million. That revenue was contributed to the capital fund through various sources of revenue listed on the slide: taxation, water billings, sewer billings, etc. It was added to the carry forward of the fund from 2017 of 6.6 million. And the city spent last year $17.2 million, and we have a capital carryover of 8.7 million of ongoing capital projects. So these are dollars sitting in our capital fund that we haven't spent yet. The city has a number of reserves set up to support the operations of the corporation. The reserves are set up in 4 separate categories: our operating reserves, capital reserves, restricted reserves that are municipally funded, and restricted reserves that are funded externally. The column on the right explains the purpose for the reserves, and a report on the status of the city reserves is provided annually to council and is included in this evening's agenda. Our operating reserves at the end of 2018 were $8.6 million. The operating reserve had a net increase of $2 million. The operating reserves consist of discretionary reserves that have been established to provide flexibility and liquidity to protect against consequences of unexpected events, losses in revenues, large unbudgeted expenditures. Includes our working reserves, our winter control reserve, tax stabilization reserve, etc. Capital reserves are still in a negative balance, but in a better situation than in 2017 at $141K. Capital reserves had a net increase of $880K, and they're used or set aside for the repair and maintenance of capital infrastructure for large capital expenditures such as facility upgrades or road reconstruction. Our restricted reserves of $42.2 million are restricted for such things as water and wastewater works reserve, our downtown investment fund, and our progress fund. Then we also have a number of reserves that are monies that we've received from external sources and by senior levels of government, some Cornwall Area Housing dollars, or for third-party like donations, the arts reserve that was recently set up. Our next slide is a summary of our tangible capital assets. City's tangible capital assets are recorded at book value and are purchased and have been purchased at just over $704 million and amortized over its useful life. The remaining book value of these assets are $406 million. Overall, the city's assets are about 58% of the original cost, or 42% used. Halfway down the list, you'll see the water and wastewater assets at 75.56% of cost, or just under 24% used. This is due to the secondary wastewater treatment plant that came onto the city's books in 2016 for $58 million. So the higher the number off on the right, the better, but you do have to look at individual reserves or individual assets themselves, to understand the condition of the city's infrastructure. The next slide is the city's long-term liabilities. At December 31st, 2018, the city's long-term debt was $53.5 million, including $38.8 million in bank loans for vehicles and equipment, facilities, etc., noted on our next slide. Cornwall Area Housing Corporation's long-term debt in the amount of $4.2 million. PSAB liabilities of $8.5 million for future employment benefits, landfill closure, post-closure costs, and an internal loan of $2 million for the purchase of land in the business park. The long-term liabilities are funded as follows at the bottom of the slide. From general municipal revenue, $37 million. Proceeds from the sale of the land in our business park, $2 million. Reserve and reserve funds, $10.2, and provincial grants for Cornwall Area Housing Corporation for the mortgages funded through MMAH, $4.1 million. More detail on the city's bank loans. The city had 38.8 million in bank loans as of December 31st, 2018. This slide provides a list of capital that we borrowed for. The average rate the city has borrowed for in the past is about 2.64%, but that is increasing with the increase we've seen in interest rates lately. The city normally borrows between 3 and 10 years, except for larger capital works such as the Benson Center or the wastewater treatment plant. In council's agenda this evening is the annual report on the city's long-term debt, including recommended debt ceilings. The city's debt ceiling, or the policy we follow, is 10% of own source revenue. In summary, the city had an operating surplus of just under 1.52 million. The surplus was contributed to working reserves, tax stabilization reserve, winter control reserve, and the landfill reserve. The city had a surplus in water services of 186K. The surplus was transferred to the water works reserve. A surplus in wastewater services of just under 300K, and it was transferred to the wastewater works reserve. The city entered into financing agreements for long-term debt for the sum of 3.4 million for culvert replacement on McConnell, the library, HVAC, Emerald Ash Bore, as well as the equipment and vehicles for municipal works, transit, paramedic services. The city's reserve and reserves funds total 56.7 million. The city's auditor will speak to the financial health of the city and has expressed that the city's financial position continues to be strong. This report was presented to the audit committee and is now recommended to council. We just wanted to let council know about a couple of 2019 initiatives. As you're aware, Financial Services is upgrading the city's accounting system in 2019, including the water and wastewater billing system. Purchasing Services is reviewing its framework for purchase of goods and services, including procurement policies, statutes, regulations, trade agreements, and current procedures. We're doing this with BLG, and BLG will be making a presentation to council in the next number of weeks. ITT Services is continuing to review new and emerging reliable technologies related to the network, infrastructure, bandwidth, privacy, security, and service levels. Staff are developing a strategic asset management policy. The policy requires council approval by July 1st, so you'll see that come to council in June. The city is undertaking a financial condition assessment, so we brought this to the audit committee for their approval. The intent of the financial condition assessment is to evaluate through trend analysis, assessments, performance indicators, benchmarking, etc., the city's past performance, financial outlook, and to identify key areas of focus. And in support of its financial planning through the long-term financial plan, the city has identified the need for enhanced updated financial policies relating to capital, debt management, reserves, and investments. The policy reviews will take place over the next 2 years. And that is the presentation of an overview.
Thank you. Any questions from council? Councillor McIntosh.
Just a couple of questions, Tracy, on the long-term liabilities, future employment benefits, 6.5 million, what's that? Well,
I'm sorry, Councillor, what page are you on?
what page am I on? Page 8.
Page 8, the PSAB liabilities,
Yeah,
future employment.
benefits.
So that is a statement in a note in our financial statements. It relates to, let me just. So our PSAB entry, future employment benefits, 5.6 million is related to accumulated sick leave benefits. That's for fire services.
Uh-huh.
Vacation pay that's accumulated but not paid out, and workplace safety and insurance for benefits of 3.2.
Doesn't involve Cornwall Police Services.
No,
So we go down to the other one down here, police post-employment loan, and it stands at 1.1 million.
so a couple of years ago, you may recall that,
Having to
pardon?
borrow 2 million,
Correct. And we're paying that off as a 10-year loan.
okay, with interest. With interest on that loan?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes,
so another 4 or 5 years that'll be paid off.
that's right.
Okay, good.
Counselor Gardner?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Tracy, on page 2, winter control reserves 300,000. I thought we put another $300,000 into that.
On page 2?
Yeah.
Yes, so this is a contribution of $300,000 to the winter control reserve. There is already $300,000 in that reserve for a total of $600,000 going into 2019.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? I just have a comment on the page, the initiatives page. I'm glad to see that purchasing services is reviewing the framework. I know that will probably please Councillor Bennett, who raised that as an issue. It's time for us to look at our procurement policies, the statutes, the regulations. I think that should be an interesting conversation. So, thank you for including that list. And thank you for the presentation. Madam Clerk?
We're going to ask Mr. Pollock and Mr. Markle to join at the presentation table and indicate which document they want to start with.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Markle, Mr. Pollock. Want to start with the financial statement? Page 131. Talk to us.
Your Worship, members of council, members of administration, ladies and gentlemen, sorry for my back. It's my best side, though. Considering that the Leafs are going to be struggling tonight,
Oh, no.
What is that all about?
I really don't want to take up much of your time so you get home for the game. So you had a surplus, your reserves are good. Thank you. Any questions? So, let's start off by, sorry, I am going to bore you for a little while. Let's start off on your page 133. 133 is the independent auditor's report. This is our document. The rest of the financial statements are the city's document. And basically, you as the council have engaged our firm to do an audit of the financial statements on behalf of the ratepayers. So we're independent from the city. We come in, we get treated like royalty, I'll tell you that. Your staff they bend over backwards for us, because if you think about it, who really wants a bunch of people coming in, bothering them for about a week and a half, a couple times a year, asking 18 million questions, but they keep smiling. I'm sure they're smiling even more when we leave, but they're very nice to us, and we thank you and administration for their support and their help. So, the audit report, this is our audit report. Now, the audit report has changed. It's now 2 pages long. And believe me, if you suffer from insomnia, I'd read the whole thing. I'm not about to read the whole thing. I'm going to read the second paragraph because that's really what it comes down to. And it says, in our opinion, the company consolidated financial statements present fairly, in all material respects, the consolidated financial position of the city as at December 31st, 2018, and the results of its consolidated operation and its consolidated cash flows for the year then in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. So what that's really mean, we're not allowed to use the word correct, but that's saying these statements are correct. So as council, again, you've engaged us on behalf of the ratepayers. The operations and the financial activities and financial operations that follow this document, our auditor's report, are basically fairly stated, and we're putting our stamp on that. So let's get to what some of these numbers say. And Tracy went through everything, so I'm not going to go in detail because she's analyzed why you had a surplus, that you had a surplus, where it went, that sort of thing. But I am going to run some highlights. I'm going to run through some statistics. I'm going to do some benchmarking, and one of the things on the 2019 initiative is the assessment that you're going to go through, which I think is a great idea, because then you can really get a good look at how you're actually doing. Because the one I do every year is we just look at a couple of municipalities in Eastern Ontario, just to give you a taste of it. But the one you're going to go through, it's going to look at a much broader cross-section, and probably on a much broader scale than I'm presenting tonight. So I'd like to draw your attention to, let's see, page 135 in your agenda. It's the Consolidated Statement of Financial Position. And really, I mean, there's a lot of numbers here, and as you can see, there's lots of money going back and forth through the corporation. But the number I want to draw your attention to is the thing called net financial assets. Now, yeah, right there. The number is $13.6 million. What does that actually mean? What it really means is that the way the financial statements are set up is that it takes your assets, which include cash, receivables, taxes receivable, things like that. Those are liquid financial assets. If they're not cash, they can turn into cash pretty quickly. But on the liability side, the liabilities include your regular payables, but they also include long-term debt. They include things like the post-employment benefits, which you have a liability for, but you won't have to pay them for years to come. You also have long-term debt in there, which exists today, but there's payment terms that you're not going to have to pay off until, in some cases, 10 to 20 years. But having a positive net financial assets number of 13.6 million means that if Doug Ford decides to get rid of municipalities tomorrow, you could pay off all your debts just with your assets. You wouldn't have to, wouldn't even have to sell one capital asset, tangible capital asset, to extinguish all your debts. So that puts you in a pretty good financial position. Most municipalities in this area, if they are in a positive number, it's very small. There are some that are negative, and it's really negative because of the scope of their long-term debt relative to their financial assets. So that in itself tells you that, yes, we have a good financial position at the end of this year, 2018. Okay? So I'm going to take you to the next page, 136. And Tracy went through a number of things where you went over and went under budget. One of the things I like to draw your attention to, because what it does, it exemplifies how good your budget process is. You know, over the years, you know, there's been some budgets that have been relatively easy and some budgets have been very difficult. And when you look at it, the part that you control the most is the expenditure side. And if you look down at your expenditures, you can see that there's $192,787,000 total budget expenditure, and you came in at about $185 million. Two things in your budget you really don't have a lot of control over. One is social and family services, and one is social housing. I mean, the parameters for that are set out for you, and they can go up and they can go down. You set it, but a lot of it's out of your control. So if we extract those two numbers out of your budget, you know how close you were to budget? You were $249,000 under budget, 0.2%. So to me, when I looked at that number, I said, wow. So your budget process is good. You're getting good financial information. So even when things go a little awry, you're able to react quick enough that you can make adjustments through. Is some of that being that close a bit of luck? Oh, yeah, of course it is. But for the most part, it is because you're getting good financial information, it's accurate, and you're getting it on a timely basis so you can make decisions. They can be brought to council, and you can make the right decision to ensure that you're not going way over budget. So that in itself, 249,000 on basically about 115 million, those are pretty good numbers. Okay, I'm going to take you now to, let's see, we're going to go a few pages. I'm going to take you to page 139, which is your consolidated statement of tangible capital assets. And I go over this one every year. That's, you know, either or, it doesn't really matter. Anyways, what I want to draw your attention to is the two far right columns. You know, the numbers are, I might even be able to read that from here with my glasses on. Anyways, the two far right columns are what I want to draw your attention to, and every year I talk to you about your relative amount of accumulated depreciation to the cost of your tangible capital assets. In other words, in the current year, you have $709 million of tangible capital assets at cost, and those assets have been depreciated to the extent of $303 million. That represents 43%. So in other words, your assets, on average, are less than half their entire age, okay, which is a good thing. For example, if that number was about 75%, I'd be telling you that you better do something because everything's about to fall apart. I'll give you a good example. If you have a truck and you depreciate the truck or amortize the truck over, say, 10 years, at 43%, it's basically 4.3 years old. That's not bad. Still running, doesn't require a lot of maintenance. But if I said that number was 75%, that truck would be 7.5 years old. And it would be getting extremely old, probably costing you a lot of money in repairs and maintenance. So 43%, and I'm going to come back to this when we do our benchmarking because I looked at it in terms of that. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Okay? Now I'm going to take you to page 151. Oh, look at all these numbers you're bypassing. Wow. Now, page 151 is basically your long-term debt. And the thing I want to point out to you is that even though you incurred more debt, your debt went down. So, because your planned payments, you didn't borrow as much as your payments were actually coming down on it. So even though you got new debt, you really didn't go anywhere. Actually, your debt went down slightly. So that's a good thing. Everybody worries about getting more debt. A lot of people don't like debt. I tend to agree with them, but in some cases you have no choice. And it's the only way to smooth your tax rate, because if you took the hit in 1 year and didn't borrow, your tax rate would go up by a lot more than it's going up. And I think you're all aware of that. So the good news on this is, yes, 2018 you borrowed just under $3 million or $4 million, but you paid off more than that anyways just on the planned payments. So even though you borrowed more, your net long-term debt position went slightly down, which is a good thing. Okay, and I wouldn't be here if I wouldn't take you to page 154, which is the reserves. Favorite schedule, and the next two are my favorite schedule. I've always preached about the benefits of reserves, and I have to say, either you're listening to me or something's happening anyways, so it's good. I mean, if you look at it, Tracy went through, your reserves have gone from 17.6 million to 20.8 million, so that's good. Your reserves are always, like when they get low, I get nervous, and I complain. So I'm not complaining this year, okay? And then the next page, if you can go to page 155, is we get into the Progress Fund and the other reserve funds. And you can see the Progress Fund didn't actually change. It earned $554,000, and that's what you utilized. You moved that over to help pay for the Benson Center debt, cover the Benson Center debt. So it's still at, on a book basis, $25,529,000. I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes as well. Okay? Then the last part I want to take you through is the statistics on page 29 and 30. Sorry, your page.
160 and 161.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm glad you can read numbers because I can't.
That's why I'm on in the field doing all the auditing.
Exactly. Yeah, I think I've told you CA stands for can't add, so. Okay, I go through this every year, and one of the things I like to bring up is how you've done over the last 5 years. For example, if we go, actually one page back, sorry. Yeah, there we go. Just go to the top of the page there. Now look at your taxation. Taxation, in 2014, you raised $62.5 million, and now it's $72.5 million. So it's an increase of just over $10 million over those 5 years. That represents a 16.1% increase. Now that sounds like a lot over 5 years because we know inflation's running 1.5%, 2%. But the city grows, the assessment grows, the city grows, and actually, without having to turn the, well, I'll get you to turn the page. Can you turn the page to 161 just at the top, please? If you look at the assessment has actually gone up over that same period by 17.7%. So in fact, your assessment's grown more than the amount of money you've raised through taxation. And you can see when you get to the next line under all that assessment, your tax rate went from 1.511, residential tax rate, down to 1.447. So in other words, you're getting some growth through assessment increase, and you're getting some growth through pure growth, like more houses are being built, more commercial assessment. And what you're doing is you're not using all of your assessment increases to, how do I phrase this better? You're not taking advantage of the assessment increases fully to raise more taxes. You're buffering your tax rate a bit, which is a good thing, because we all know nobody likes a tax increase, but it's a reality. You have to do it. You can't do 0%. I'm never in favor of 0% because it's impossible to maintain. And even lowering, now you've lowered your tax rate. So basically what's happening is you're using the bulk of your assessment, but you're not using it all. So you are basically being very, I'd say, stalwart in ensuring that the rate doesn't go up as much as you could probably push it up, okay? Or keep it the same, basically. You've actually decreased your tax rate. Some of the other stats on there that I like to draw your attention to is down there where it's showing their tax arrears. You'll see under 2018, that's 3%. And what does that mean? That means that the people that haven't paid their taxes, or the businesses and people that haven't paid their taxes, the total amount of that on the total levy is only 3%. To give you an example of where you sit with other municipalities, at least in the region, they range from 6.5% to 20%. So your number is very good. Okay? One of the other numbers I like to look at is the debt under the flexibility column. The debt charges to operating revenue. You're looking at 2.96, less than 3% of your total budget goes towards debt. So we talked about debt earlier. You know, you got new debt. I'm saying debt's not a bad thing. It should be used wisely. And in our management letter last year, we talked about developing a debt policy or debt procedure policies and procedures. Administration is going to be working on it, but we can't, you know, you've done a lot already. You've done the asset management plan. You've done a number of major policies and plans. The only one that's really missing in that whole kind of collection is the debt side of it, to actually outline when you can take on debt and that sort of thing, to follow that. So that's all I have for the financial statements. Now, I did do a little chart here somewhere. I did have it. There it is. It was that spreadsheet I sent over earlier to Paul. There it is. Okay. Here is what I put together. I went through and looked at the city of Cornwall, I looked at the city of Belleville, and I do that because basically you have roughly the same population, and it's in eastern Ontario. And I look at Brockville because it's the closest city to us. Mind you, Brockville's a little less than half the size. So if you look at the numbers, population-wise, Belleville has actually passed us. They've hit the 50,000 mark, which ticks me off every time I drive to Toronto and I see they've hit 50,000. So.
Me too.
And we're still at 46 to 47,000. Look at the one thing I found interesting is we have more households. So, now, every year I talk about our situation, I'll call it a predicament with assessment. Look at our assessment and look at Belleville's. Substantial difference. And when I talk to you about assessment, it basically controls just about everything you do, because it ties your hands in terms of tax rates, because you don't have the flexibility, because you don't have the assessment to raise a lot of money through taxes. When you look at the difference, that's about 40% higher that Belleville has, and yet they have roughly the same number of households. You would like to have that issue. So the assessment per household, ours is 162,000. This isn't average household assessment. This is the average assessment per household, okay? because there's commercial, industrial, and everything in there. So this isn't what's saying your average house is worth. This is just to give you an idea, based on the number of households. We're at 162,000, Belleville's at 232, and even Brockville is at 204,000. So we have an uphill battle because our assessment is so low. Now, one of the things I've looked at in the past is reserve and reserve funds, and it's interesting is Belleville is now past us in total. And one of the things, we've always had more than they have. Now, keep in mind, these are based on 2017 numbers, so you're better once again this year, but it gives you an idea. Your reserve and reserve funds, we're at 52 million, they're at 87 million, and Brockville's at 12 million. So Brockville is nowhere close to what we are, but we're starting to fall behind Belleville. And if you look at reserves, 17.6 million in reserves, which is now 20 million, and Belleville only has 1.2 million, which is a little unusual. But when you look deeper, when you dig deeper, in their reserve funds is $21 million of what they call surplus allocation into the reserve funds. So really, those should be reserves, or I would put them in reserves. So in fact, their reserve position is stronger than ours, their reserve fund position is stronger than ours, and their obligatory reserve funds is stronger than ours. So Belleville, probably in the last 5 years, has come way up. And I remember a couple of years ago I said, actually, we're catching down. They're catching down to us. On the reserve side, Belleville is just leapfrog right past us. One of the interesting things that came out of it is one of the more controversial development charges issues is Belleville has one. They have $14 million in their development charges. And what surprised me is Brockville has a development charges bylaw. So then, when we get to tangible capital assets, and again, this is last year. Remember I talked about that 43%? Well, that's exactly what we were last year, 43%. Belleville's at 41%, and Brockville's at 39%. That's the amortization, that's the assets, amortization to cost of assets. So you're basically all in the same range, okay? Nothing to worry about. Now, anything in red means that we're the worst at in this comparison. A blue means we're in the middle. So the next one is the average cost of assets to assessment. In other words, we're purchasing all these assets, but if you put it in relation to your assessment, because that's your base of where you get your funds from, we're actually middle ground. And everything is pretty tight in there, between 18 cents, 20 cents, and 19 cents. So it just means that, you know, overall capital assets with your assessment base, you're doing fine. You're not losing ground to anybody. You've got what you need to have. So we're not behind anybody. We're not ahead of anybody. So the next page, we get into long-term debt. And as I explained earlier, there's nothing wrong with long-term debt. I know at one point we had no debt here, but that was a function of purchasing Cornwall Electric, which was 20 years ago. Got through all that, and now we're back in debt, into getting debt or using debt to purchase assets, that sort of thing. Our capital, our tangible, or what is it, the capital asset, the asset management plan even dictates when we should be borrowing, that sort of thing. So there's nothing wrong with debt, it just has to be used wisely. But what this is showing is that actually you're ahead of everybody else. That first in the yellow bar, that's $16.10. What that represents is the cost of assets that you have to the debt load. So it's a bit confusing, but a higher number is better because that means you've got less debt. Or you may have more debt depending than say Brockville does, but you have way more assets. So it's a balance between the two. So you can see that even you're ahead of Belleville because Belleville has $96 million of debt, more than double what you guys have, okay? Then I went to expenditures and I started doing some benchmarking there. Now, one of the things I've done is I've taken anything out related to do with social and family and social housing, because again, even though it's generated by you, you're probably one of the only single-tier or, actually, cities, lower-tier municipalities or separated municipalities that actually handles welfare, social housing. It's usually done by the upper tier. You're one of the few. So I had to extract that from the info. But when I looked at it, I looked at total expenditures. Now, the total expenditures are with that. So you've got 183 million versus Belleville's only at 130 million. I'm going, well, wait a second here. So I backed that off and I started looking at total expenditures per household once I backed off social housing and social services. And look at how close you are to Belleville in terms of expenditures per household. You're almost identical. And Brockville's a little less. Then we get into fire, because over the years, there's always been some discussion about how much of the budget fire and police take up. And that, again, comes back to our level of assessments, but when I was thinking of doing this, assessment doesn't mean much when somebody tells you I'm spending so much to protect each and every family. So you wouldn't want to see this number being like $120. So you're actually the lowest in fire expenditures per household at $449, $571 for Belleville, and Brockville is $648. Police expenditures, you're actually the opposite, but they're all very close. So they're all within, what are we within? 60 bucks, 50 bucks. Yeah. And then the last one, just out of interest, was recreation. You're kind of in the middle. How much do you spend per household on recreation? So you're in the middle there. So what this is basically saying, and I know, first of all, there's a couple things that I have to say you have to take with a grain of salt. When municipalities put their information on the financial information return, they may allocate things differently, so those numbers may be a bit soft. Okay? So that makes these stats, they're not the holy grail. Okay? So they're just to give you an idea more than anything else. The second thing is, this is a very small cross-section. Later in the year, when you get the results of this benchmarking study you're going to do, you'll have a better thing. But I found what it does is it says, okay, overall we have a very strong financial position. We continue to manage that, and we do a good job at that. In terms of expenditures, you always wonder how you're sitting, but looking at this very quickly on just two cross-sections between Belleville, which is roughly the same size, and Brockville, which is around 21,000 people, when you work it out two per household, we're not out of what I would call, we're not outside an acceptable range. We're all within this, we're all pretty close to each other. And I know the only thing that we're really, I'll say, suffering on is our low assessment, and it hurts us. And it hurts you at budget time, and you feel it, we all feel it. So that's the issue that is difficult to deal with, because you've got to get people to settle here. And
Mr. Markle, does that speak to the efficiency of our services? We often have to explain to taxpayers, or taxpayers want to hear from us as to whether they're getting value for their tax dollar. Does that speak to that? If the total expenditures line per household, does that mean that the cost of services here is similar to the cost of services in those other cities?
Yeah, that's basically what it's saying. I really can't speak to the efficiency of it, because we don't know if they're inefficient or efficient as well.
Okay.
All it's really saying is that, for example, on fire or policing or even recreation, we're all roughly in the same amount that you're spending per household.
Right.
And what struck me was, on the per household side, when you look at, say, fire or policing, it's not what your assessment is that's important to determine how much coverage you got. It's what are you spending per household, and what's that municipality spending, and you're in the same ballpark. So you're not, we're not suffering in the services you're providing because of assessment.
Right.
It may hurt the tax rate, but you're still providing the essential services, and you're doing it roughly at the same cost per household that other municipalities are doing. So,
It's compelling.
yeah.
Now, you say the numbers are soft, but that they will be, I guess, more firm once we do further benchmarking studies, is that it?
I would think so, because the people that do your benchmarking study, they've got access to everything. But again, a lot of this information will come from the financial information returns, which every municipality records things differently, does an allocation of, say, general government services to these other areas differently. You know, they could have their upper management group under one category versus the other. So the numbers are somewhat soft. They're not, you can't take them as this is exactly what's going on. But it does give you an idea or an indication that what you're spending per household is an appropriate and good amount.
Thank you.
So that was it for the benchmarking.
Councillor Gardner has a question.
I just have a question. When we started talking about development charges, I look at the numbers that you've shown, and it doesn't seem to have hurt Belleville at all. I mean, we have $0 because we just started it, but
Right.
Belleville has, what, 17 million, I think was showing? in there?
14 million, I
So
think.
does it hurt?
Well, I mean, I'll probably get asked this in a few minutes about my views on development charges, but
Yes, you will, sir.
That's okay. That's
Wonder for
why-
who?
That's why you're here.
But, I mean, the quantum, what the quantum of what's in their development charges reserve fund or obligatory reserve fund is telling you is that even in Brockville, yeah, they have money set aside under this bylaw. So whether that's a good number, whether it's been there for 30 years or 2 years, I don't know. It's a sizable number, but I can't tell you how long it's been there, how much they generate each year. I didn't look into that, so. Okay?
Thanks for the help.
Good. Good. Okay. So just, I'll be happy to answer anybody's questions. The only thing I've got left to do is just, there's basically one issue that I want to talk about on the management letter. The other ones, you have the reports. First of all, in our review of your internal controls, we found your controls to be very good. They're, most important to me is the attitude that your administration follows or has with regard to these internal controls. If we point something out, they fix it, which is good for you because you as council, one of the things as council, you are basically you're the overseers of everything in terms of how this municipality operates. So if you had an administration that really didn't care about this or care about that, you may not hear about it unless it comes from us. So what I'm basically telling you is that if there is an issue we have with an internal control, we bring it up with administration, they do their best to fix it right away. And they have over the years. I mean, sometimes it takes a couple of years, sometimes they do it right away, but it's the attitude towards control that I really want to pass on to council, that your administration is doing and has a very good attitude towards those, strengthening and maintaining those controls. So that's actually comforting for you as a council. So anyways, and what the management letter does is it talks about different things. The one thing I want to bring up is, what would it be without talking about the Progress Fund? They wouldn't be here. The Progress Fund, we noticed this year that, and we had mentioned it last year, that you have your money invested in the Progress Fund, and it has to have a minimum balance of $25 million that's set out by bylaw. The investments, unfortunately, have fallen below the $25 million. So in your reserve and reserve fund policy that was established in 2014, you have a mechanism under which you can get it back to the $25 million. And what that is instead of using 100% of the income that comes from the reserve fund, you're only allowed to allocate 80%, and the 20% stays in the reserve fund to replenish it. We were offside, and the 20% didn't happen. Okay? And in fact, by the time we pointed it out to administration for 2019 in your budget, it wasn't dealt with in your budget as well. Because what it really does is all of a sudden 20% of the income that you're expecting to go through there shouldn't be there. It should remain in the Progress Fund, in which case the tax rate will have to support that. Okay? So That was the key point that we wanted to bring to council's attention. And administration has come up, they're gonna move 200,000 that otherwise would have gone, and I think you're voting on that later or in another presentation. So anyways, administration does have a plan to deal with the shortcomings of not following that policy. And there's a couple of other new points this year. I'm not overly concerned about them. They're good bedtime reading. And the other one that I had mentioned before is a recommendation of prior year is the debt management policy. You need to get that in play. And administration's come back and said, yeah, within the next 2 years, we'll deal with that. So overall, you had a great year. I mean, what's not to like about a $1.5 million surplus? I mean, ideally, you want your surplus to be zero, but that's just not possible. But if you're going to be on one side of it, you might as well be on the positive side of it. Again, your controls are well looked after. They're strong, they're in place, they're reviewed constantly. Your financial position is good. You actually increased your investments this year because your cash management improved by about $10 or $12 million, which is always a nice thing. So overall, I know I sound like a broken record year after year, but you're still in very good shape.
Any questions from council? Councillor Gardner? Oh, no, I think I had Councillor Mack first and then Councillor Gardner. Go ahead, Councillor Mack.
Thank you, Russ. Watching the clock.
Yeah, I could tell.
The couple of points here, you talked about the Belleville, I think Sid referred to this, their reserve fund development charges, 14 million, and they've been doing it for some time now, and I believe it's up to $10,000 a lot now, so.
I have no idea.
So that's, one of the reasons why they probably got that amount. When you talk about households, and you were mentioning that we have more households than Brockville and Belleville, what's the definition of a household? Is it an apartment or a resident where two people live or one person lives or a family lives?
Claude, I'm not actually sure because I just took this information right off the FIR.
Yeah, okay.
So however they determine it, it's consistent because actually it's impact that determines a household, whether it's a household or not.
Okay, just seems. The other thing I'm interested in too is the police costing of $865 per household.
Right.
Belleville, $816, and Brockville, $849. Interesting, we keep getting told that we'd save millions of dollars by having the OPP do Cornwall. OPP bases their costs on per household. Okay? We have more households than these other guys have.
Right.
And yet, Brockville did the study, and they said we can do it cheaper than the OPP, and they're $16 above us.
Right.
So kind of flies in the face of what, the millions of people tell us we could save by bringing OPP, and they base it on households. That would probably cost us even more because we've got more households. Interesting stat. When it comes to the Benson Center, we're taking $554,949 out of the progress fund, and putting it in there. If we didn't do that, that'd be interest. We'd be paying more interest, wouldn't we, on the debt?
Well, yes, actually,
Yeah,
you have to.
so we're saving money there too.
Yes.
Yeah, so, that's sort of, again, the debate over the progress fund. This is a good example of why it's worked, because it's saving us more than that. It's saving us interest on that money.
Yeah, I have to say I've been one of the biggest fans of how we've utilized the Progress Fund and the purpose it was set up for 20 years ago, and how council after council has followed that edict and usefulness of it. Because I know there's always, every couple of years, there's a discussion whether we should collapse it, use that money. You use that money, it's gone. Whereas I think one of the numbers on there shows you how much, I think it's about $20 million that is basically taken and said, okay, for example, let me take a step back. If we took that $25 million and used it instead of putting it in the Progress Fund, okay? That would have been used, and it would be gone. But that $25 million is sat there, and now we've got, just from the interest and income from investments alone, it's what, 20 million?
Yeah, $20.2 million.
Yeah, 20.2, and it'll continue to do that. Unfortunately, these years, because of the way the economy is, we're not earning as much as we used to. So we're at 500 and some thousand, 550,000 this year.
Yeah.
But even if you do that over 10 years, that's still, 5.5 million.
I'm glad you brought up the assessment issue, because it's hard for some people to understand that our assessment is so low.
Right,
Well, lower than the comparables.
yes.
We're sort of like the corner store trying to compete with the food chain down the street.
I'm not sure I'd put it that way, but, yeah.
But, you know, we don't have that big chunk of money coming in from assessment.
No, you don't
These
have,
guys-
you have no flexibility.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I'm glad you pointed out the work of our finance department. I think they do a great job, and it shows up in this.
Counselor Gardner?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I was kind of afraid to come today because every year when I was here before, you told us that our reserves were too low, you gotta look after your reserve. Where do you think we stand now? I know publicly, recently, I suggested that we were in pretty good shape with our reserves overall. Comment.
Your reserves are good. I mean, you have now targets in your reserve and reserve fund policy that, you set out exactly what you want in those reserves. That policy was set up looking at the overall financial condition of the municipality and what was necessary. You're almost there in a lot of cases, or you are there in a lot of cases. My personal belief, and I've done this with all the municipalities that we've worked on, is you get the reserves up, you have some flexibility, especially because your assessment is so low, as Councillor McIntosh just alluded to. You have almost no flexibility if something comes out. Well, for example, the write-downs of the on your assessment base on the distribution centers and a certain other store, that hurt. The only thing that really helped you was your ability to sustain that or push it over a couple of years because you had good, deep reserves. Now, it'll hurt the reserves, but it'll come back up, and you already put some money into it based on this year's surplus. So it's those reserves that give you some degree of flexibility because your assessment's not giving you any of that. If you had if you had some room in your tax rate with large assessment, you could weather stuff like that. But you haven't got that. So the only place you can get that is reserves. And the problem with that is your reserves are fragile. There's a tendency to push that 0% tax rate. And I am never in favor of that because all your costs go up year after year. What happens if you have a council that goes year after year at 0%, they deplete their reserves. They undercut capital. They don't do the required capital to maintain their asset base. And all they've done is move 4 years of trouble back. So.
And I remember you saying that in the past.
Yeah, so the reserves are a key component of good financial strength. Your $20 million of reserves, and then what have we got in reserve funds? Another 32?
Yeah, $33.7 million in
Yeah,
reserve
so,
funds.
yeah, so they're good,
In
they're
good
strong. And that's one of the reasons I say you're in good financial shape.
Thank you.
Counselor Elaine McDonald?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, two things with regarding the 0%. I shudder every time somebody says it out loud, and I have to say that you're the only person who said it in a serious context this year. We got through budget without somebody saying, let's go to zero, so I think that's good news. You'll probably be pleased to hear that. But I've got a question now about the statement you made with regard to the progress fund, the 25 million. You said it's less than 25 million. You alluded to a mistake in budgeting, and was it so much a mistake as simply that we didn't get the interest that we had anticipated, so we didn't get the return we wanted? Or was there actually something we could have done differently?
Well, I think I would call it an oversight more than anything else because the policy's relatively new. Something like this doesn't happen. It's never really happened before until last year. So it's more of an oversight, and now that administration is aware of it, they'll be watching for it. But it's just a case in point. You have a policy in place. You've got a lot of policies in place. So to remember and act on every single policy, that's difficult to do. So our job is to make sure that you do, and we pointed this one out. So it was,
Yep.
I certainly will say it wasn't on purpose that they did
No.
this. But the problem with it is because of the way it works, the tax, like the hit to the tax rate was about 100,000, there should have been about $110,000 hit to the tax amount you had to raise for taxes this year that wasn't there.
Mhm.
So,
Okay, well, thank you. And I'm sure like other things that you brought to our attention, our finance department fixes things pretty fast.
you know, they do.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Councillor Hollingsworth?
Just one question with regards to the Progress Fund. If we leave it, so currently, the city has $25 million in this Progress Fund, and we've said, okay, we're gonna keep it at $25 million for however,
Right.
for eternity, if you wanna say that. But technically speaking, by maintaining it 25 million, aren't we in essence losing in the sense that inflation is going to keep going up? And so by leaving it at 25 million, certainly 25 million today doesn't have the same buying power that it would have had, 10 or 15, 20 years ago, and it's probably not gonna have the same buying power that we'll have 20 years from now. So in essence, if we wanted to maintain that savings account, for lack of a better term, at its current buying level or purchasing power, shouldn't we kind of keep contributing, let's say 2% per year into that? So instead of 25 million, it's 25 million plus 2% this year, and then that plus 2%. Like, shouldn't we have to kind of kick in to maintain that purchasing power or revenue generating power? Is that not a fair assessment?
It is. I mean, I just look at university tuitions, which are subject to change. 40 years ago, my final year wasn't that bad. 40 years ago, my tuition in fourth year was $600.
Right.
So,
That's
case
right.
in point, yes. Should we be considering that? Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Can we come back to development charges? Just wanted, so this is the first year.
Yes.
I think we've already seen some impact in the budget. Will it be clear as we go forward in our financial statements next year and the year after, will it be clear what impact that will have, and will it be clear where those monies are going to? Because that's the question out there in the community. So how do these work, and do they hurt anybody? And if they help, how do they help? Is it money that just goes to the bottom line, or is it money that's specifically directed to something concrete? And will that show up in our financial statements?
Well, will you see it line by line in the financial statements? No, because there's so much in the financial statements to try and figure out what happened here and what happened there. They don't show that. The development charges bylaw, as you know, was established. The province set this up decades ago. And the sole purpose of it was, where a municipality is growing, there's strains on the tax base because, for example, all of a sudden you need a second fire station, or you need another police station, or you need something like that. The developers that are developing the properties that you're getting you're getting a brand new street and a whole bunch of houses on it. When they take it over, you're getting that tax base, which covers, for example, future costs of snow plowing, all those things, the day-to-day stuff, the street light power that goes in front of the sidewalk clearing, salting, sweeping the roads, to a certain extent, some sewer and water charges, but for the most part, those are on user charges. But all of a sudden, if you add 10 subdivisions, you need a new fire station there, or you need new ambulance bay, or you need another police station, or you have to expand all the infrastructure that you've got to provide the services that you're providing. So the idea behind the development charges bylaw that the province established again years ago was to charge for people that are paying for that expansion. And it's not so much the developers, it's the people that are buying the houses, that are buying the lots, buying the houses. The developer will basically pass that cost on to the individual or family that's buying the house. And that was the idea behind it. And the development charges bylaw itself dictated specifically where that money could be spent and how. So you just couldn't use it for general operations.
Right.
You couldn't use it to help reduce the tax rate directly by saying, okay, we're going to take 200,000 out of the development charges bylaw because we're almost at a balanced budget. You can't do that. It's for very specific things, and you've outlined that in your bylaw. The issue becomes that the developers will come, and even some individuals looking to buy houses, you've just raised the price of a house. Are we going to remain competitive with our surrounding municipalities? We'll never know that. I think, Madam Mayor, you asked me what I thought of development charges bylaw, and I told you the first thing is I've got quite a conflict here, being that my brother's a developer. So I can see his point of view, and a lot of the developers are upset because usually you put a development charges bylaw in place when there's growth, because you need to fund these expansions of your services. We don't have that growth in the city, so that's where the conundrum comes up in terms of the disparity between what you as a council are saying and what the developers are kind of barking back at you and say, well, wait, this is for growth things. For example, at one point there was discussion about reducing the number of fire stations down back to 1, as opposed to setting up a development charges bylaw to expand, and possibly expand. So there's a bit of a conflict there in what everybody says. Now, having said that, Brockville has one. You're one of the few larger municipalities that doesn't have one. The neighboring municipalities where, let's say, the developers may have land here, they may have land out there, it's cheaper to live, say, in South Stormont than it is in the city. So why wouldn't you move out there if it's city? Well, people don't. They do, and they don't look at that. They don't sit there and say, well, I'm moving here just because the tax base is different. Or I'm moving here because my house is $5,000 cheaper. Well, they may. But I think there's a whole plethora of reasons why they move where they do. They like the tree there. They like the kids that's near the school. It's one of many things. And I think one of the questions that was in the paper that was posed to one of the developers, I believe it was my nephew, was that, are you still going to keep building? He said yes, and people will still keep buying. They will. The question is the city going to have this much assessment increase or this much assessment increase? Because there's only so many building lots available in the city, and there's only a number of developers that have the funds to actually develop. Because to develop a subdivision, it's hugely expensive, and you have to have relatively deep pockets because it takes years and years and years to get your money out of it. So it's not for the faint of heart. And so, of course, they don't like the fact that this may slow down some of the development. But eventually, those houses will get sold. Does the city need it? Yes, you need every dime you can scrape out because your assessment base is in such, I wouldn't call it depressed, but it's poorer than your competitors. So.
Thank you. Yes, municipal work is not for the faint of heart. I understand. I had two more questions. Debt management policy, you say that we're on track to getting that done, but does our long-term financial plan not already deal with that?
It deals with to an extent, but I think what you need to do is actually have a debt policy that outlines in every circumstance, like capital leases. For example, you'll get into a long-term lease. We basically set those up as liabilities, like long-term liabilities, like debt. You don't have many of those, but that may be another conduit to borrowing. So there's all kinds of things that you need to consider in terms of what type of debt, how long is the debt, those sort of things. That policy that you looked at, it deals in a general sense about when we can borrow for longer term and when we can borrow.
Okay.
So we need just to get a little more detail, so in most circumstances it'll be covered.
Got it, thank you. Last question is around landfill closure. So are we looking okay there? Because we've been talking about the landfill. We've made some changes in terms of our garbage contract and how we're going to be recycling and how we're going to be collecting. the issue of the expense, the life of the landfill, the expense of closure has come up. Are
Yes.
we on track according to what you see in our financial statements?
Well, when PSAB was enacted, one of the things that it brought to bear was to put in the financial statements, just like the post-employment benefits. It set up these liabilities so council would be aware of, yes, there's a liability there that we have to deal with. It doesn't affect your surplus or anything, but it's staring you in the face when you look at your liabilities. So at some point, you've got to come to grips with, how are we going to pay for this? We know we're going to have to close it eventually. They don't last in perpetuity.
No.
Your landfill site, everybody's landfill site comes to the point where it has to be closed. Now, I understand you're updating the engineering study so that we get a better idea of what's going on in terms of what years are left and that sort of thing. But you're under its present condition, your landfill site has got a finite life ahead of it that's not that far away. It's not in this council's purview, but it will be within the next 3 or 4, I believe, that something has to be done. So in which case, our job is to basically point out, what is that liability and how are you making plans for it financially? How are we going to afford to close that thing? And that doesn't include opening another or dealing with that. That is just what's it going to cost to close this landfill site and maintain those closure costs for a number of years thereafter. So,
Okay.
okay.
And this is where a debt management policy will come into play. If your
Right.
reserve policy will come into play, everything will be tied in together. And one of our recommendations is to look at your landfill reserve fund and say, well, you might want to build this up because if everything's according to the plan based on a few years ago, you got 15 years left, and how you're going to finance that
Okay.
going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Markle. Thank you, Mr. Pollock, for your field work as well. And I thank you for commenting on the work of our financial staff. We are grateful to them. Thank you, Madam CFO, Mr. Scrimshaw, and thank you, Mr. Markle and Mr. Pollock, for your work, for your presentation.
Thank you.
And one thing I learned from field work, that only in Canada where the leaves fall in the springtime.
Oh. I asked for that. I opened it up for that.
We'll find that out in a couple hours.
Thank you both,
Okay, thank you.
and to your team as well.
2-1.
Madam Clerk?
2-1.
So we're going to deal with the communication issue now, the financial statements, and the recommendation is that council approve the 2018 audited financial statements.
Councillor Grant and Councillor Towndale, any further debate on this? All in favor? Thank you. Do we have an update as to the score?
2-1
Councillor Towndale?
2-1 Boston, 2-1.
Thank you. Madam Clerk?
So we're going to enter our consent portion of the agenda. Item 1 is a PAC report number 3 from April 15th, with a recommendation that council approve the following recommendations from the Planning Advisory Committee for properties located at 29 Second Street East, 245 and 249 Pitt Street, 108 Pitt Street, and 1200 Second Street West. Item 2, elected officials' expense statements for the period of January 1st to March 31st, with a recommendation that council receive the statement of expenses for elected officials for the period of January 1st to March 31st. Our third item is the Ontario Regulation 28409, Budget Matters Expenses, with a recommendation that council adopt this report by resolution as required under the Municipal Act 2001, Ontario Regulation 28409. Item 4, 2018 Annual Report on the status of city reserves, recommending that city receive the report on city's reserves and reserve funds at December 31st, 2018. 2018 Annual Report on Municipal Debt Limits, recommending that council adopt this report by resolution as required under the Municipal Act 2001, Ontario Regulation 403/02. 2018 Annual Report on Development Charges Reserve Fund, recommending that council receive this report prepared in accordance with Section 12 of OReg 8298 of the Development Charges Act 1997. Item 8, proclamation of Cape Weekend. Recommended that council proclaim the weekend of April 27th and 28th, 2019 as Cape Weekend in the city of Cornwall. Our next
May I stop you there, Madam Clerk?
Yes.
I just want to highlight that it's Cape Weekend and that all of council is invited to the opening ceremonies this Saturday at 9:45. Cape Weekend, everyone is welcome. Thank you. Sorry, Madam Clerk.
Our next proclamation is recommended that council proclaim Sunday, April 28th, 2019 as Pay It Forward Day in the city of Cornwall. Our next one recommends that council proclaim Monday, May 6th, 2019 as River Institute Day in the city of Cornwall and allow for its flag to be flown at 340 Pitt Street on that day. Our next one recommends that council proclaim Monday, May 13th, 2019 as Fallon Daffa Day in the city of Cornwall. Our next one is recommended that council proclaim the month of May 2019 as Community Living Month in the city of Cornwall. Our next proclamation is recommended that council proclaim the week of May 6th to 12th, 2019 as Nursing Week in the city of Cornwall. Item 14, temporary road closure for cycling and running competition. Recommended that council approve a temporary road closures for the annual cycling and running competition triathlon on August 24th and 25th, 2019 as requested. Item 15, National Disaster Mitigation Program funding. Recommended that council receive this report and direct administration to prepare a bylaw for the next regular meeting to authorize the City of Cornwall to enter into a transfer payment agreement with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing for the National Disaster Mitigation Fund.
Motion for the consent items. Councillor Towndale, Councillor Bennett, all in favor? Carried. Resolutions?
I have none, Madam Mayor.
Unfinished business reports.
Corporate policy, protection and enhancement of tree canopy and natural vegetation. Recommended that this council be adopted by council adopt this corporate policy.
Anybody want to make that motion? Councillor Gardner, seconded by? Councillor Elaine McDonald? Councillor Caroline Hébert?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If everybody remembers, a couple of meetings ago, this came to us. And I asked that we look into this a bit further so that we can maybe add a bit more teeth to this bylaw in terms of increasing our canopy. I really love the bylaw that has been put together. It's a really great start, bringing all of the different departments under sort of one document. However, I feel like we have an opportunity here to take it a bit further. So it's now come back to us. The bylaw is virtually the same. There has been a couple of paragraphs added to the bylaw that discusses the recommendations for tree canopy, and I'm just going to refer to the report here. So the watershed basis is a minimum of 30% tree canopy coverage. And in 2015, the Raisin Region Conservation Authority provided us with a report where at that time the City of Cornwall, as a municipality, our tree cover was about 20%. This was when Emerald Ash Borer was just getting started. So I'm pretty certain that we're below 20% now, and with this issue continuing for the next several years, I think it's 6 years, we're still working on Emerald Ash, that'll be significantly lower. I know we are planting 1 for 1, that's not necessarily adding to the beautiful large tree canopy that we have. We are cutting that down significantly. So I feel that having this bylaw in front of us here gives us an opportunity to set some goals. And in the report, it does say that administration does not propose to establish a specific goal for forest cover within the city at this time, but rather to formalize existing policies, as well as encourage actions that lead to an increase in the municipal tree canopy. So I'm not sure what that means, encourage action that leads to an increase in tree canopy. Is there a strategy? Is there some specifics in the bylaw that'll give us some guidelines on that? I just feel that it's not quite enough. a goal is a goal. It doesn't mean by next year we're going to increase to back to 20% or 30%. It is just something that we want to achieve. Doesn't mean we have to achieve it. So I don't know why it's not being reflected here. I think that there's time to pass this bylaw. I don't know if it needs to happen today, but at the last Raisin Region Conservation Authority Board meeting, which Councillor McIntosh and I sit on, there was a presentation on this specifically by Kim McDonald, and she's the watershed planner. I have her extension and contact information if anybody would like it, but she presented on all kinds of different ways that we can increase the tree canopy, unique ways that might not be so difficult, and encouraged all municipalities to reach out to her and to work out a plan and where they can support or make recommendations. So I would recommend either defer this until that conversation happens, or we pass this and then I move another motion to bring in a secondary bylaw, which I think would be redundant. I think it should all be under one umbrella here. So at this point, hoping maybe I can get some support for another deferral, unless there's a date that this needs to be passed by. And then in that case, I guess I'll do a secondary motion.
Okay, do you want an answer to that question first?
Yeah.
Okay,
Sure.
Madam CAO?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I believe that the policy was to be put in place by the 1st of, I want to say the 1st of March. However, there isn't, based on some of the changes that are coming forward to municipalities, I don't believe that there's any type of penalty to a municipality for not having it approved at this point in time. I think what's important is we've brought it forward to council, council's reviewing it. I think we can demonstrate that the municipality is taking action towards working towards the policy. So my preference would be to, if there are still changes that council would like to see in the policy, I would prefer to take the time to do it right. Potentially a deferral, I think, would be reasonable as far as the work that's being done so far. And so that's just my,
So a motion to defer is always in order?
Sure. Can I get a seconder for that?
Councillor McIntosh is
Excellent.
seconding.
Thank you.
Okay, do you have any further comments?
No, I'm just hoping that we can, I can have my counselor, my colleagues support for this deferral, and that communication does happen with Raisin Region and some of those really great initiatives that they discussed at our previous board meeting.
I can come back to you for wrap-up as well.
Thank you. Sure.
Councillor Grant?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted more clarification on why we're deferring it. And it's to go back to the Raisin River Conservation Authority and get their input. Is that what I hear?
Madam CEO, is that what's,
yes, but I believe also Councillor Hebert is also looking at, we'll take a look at the second page of the communication report. I think when we're looking at some of our goals, I think she's looking at potentially modifying some of those numbers, increasing
Absolutely.
our coverage.
So you feel comfortable with the direction of the deferral?
Yes, if there's more feedback from council, we would certainly appreciate to hear that from council this evening, but we can take some of that, back and engage with,
Okay, is there a time limit in this as well? Defer till,
I guess what I know, administration has a lot on their plate right now, so
it would depend on how quickly we could get into conversation with the
Sure.
Conservation Authority. If that could happen, it can happen, we've got 3 weeks before our next council meeting, so there's a possibility that it could come back on the next meeting, depending on how that feedback
good, okay, thank you.
continues.
thank you, Councillor Grant. Anybody else on this? And you can speak on any issues you might want to add to the bylaw. I'll allow that. All right, Councillor Lane? Oh, did I have, no, I think I'm bypassing Councillor McIntosh again.
Getting used to it.
What's going on?
I don't
He's
have to go home to be
aggrieved.
ignored.
No, Councillor McIntosh and then Councillor Elaine McDonald.
Through you to Mr. Porter, Scott, any idea how many trees we've cut down in the last 3 or 4 years since the ash borer program started?
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor. Over the last 3 to 4 years with ash borer, we're up around the 2,500.
2,500 fewer trees because of that, and more to come.
And more coming. That doesn't include private trees either.
Yeah.
So there's all the private ash trees within town too that are still going to have to be cut down.
one of the benefits we have in Cornwall is I don't think we have in some cities, and I'm thinking of a community I'm very familiar with, Brantford, where they go in and they cut 10 acres of trees down and start building homes. We don't really have that here, do we?
No, there's not been any massive tree cuttings. Municipal Works and engineering are great trying to keep the trees in subdivisions when they get.
Yeah, in North Riverdale, they have a thing going. I don't think many trees have been cut down, if any. The Raisin Region, they have a program where do they sell or give away seedlings? I'm not sure.
It's both. They have a giveaway on Earth Day, and then they also.
Would
sell
we ever
seedlings.
think of doing that for an Earth Day?
Because of the Conservation Authority, we don't even compete with them.
Okay, because they tell us they run out of trees, so it's a very
Just
popular.
we use their program
Yeah.
with residents, so.
Okay, and I guess we could have a program too, if we advance this, of encouraging people to plant a tree in memory of somebody in the backyard or something, or a dead cat.
And we have the memorial tree planting program too, people can use too. so.
We do.
Okay, very good.
Any other comments, questions? Councillor Lane, sorry. Councillor Lane McDonald?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm wondering if, are we going to wait for administration to bring back a higher objective, or should that not come from council? Like maybe Councillor Hubert would suggest a target, and then we could debate it and adopt it? Or what's the situation here? Are we deferring to wait for administration to,
And I think there's going to be some consultation with the Raisin River, right? Could they help us with targets? Madam CIO?
Potentially. If there are targets in mind, though, again, like, it doesn't have to, we could bring it back on a report coming back to council. So if Councillor Hebert would like to share that with administration, whether it's this evening or whether she has some other objectives, we can certainly take that into consideration. Report will come back to council. Council can review it.
well, I support the deferral then, but I hope there'd be some specific, not just for administration to try harder, retire or whatever. Thank you.
Any other comments?
I'll wrap up.
I have a question for Mr. Porter first. Have we gone to the public with this, put anything out on the website or surveyed? Because I know that kids love to talk about trees. It's a big deal. And be interesting to hear from them. I don't know if we've made any efforts around that.
We haven't done anything specifically other than we try to promote it with the schools and with
Right.
school groups and Boy Scouts and Girl Guides.
Okay.
But other than that, no, we haven't done any real promotion on it that way.
Could
But
we?
it is on our webpage
Yeah.
about the tree planting and
Okay. Maybe I'll suggest to the CAO that maybe we talk to Ms. Meldrum about
Excellent.
reaching out a little bit to see if anybody has anything to say, especially young people.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Porter. Councillor Abel, you want to wrap up?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for adding the potential public consultation aspect. I think it'd be really great to engage the community and see what they think. On the comments about an actual percentage, I think it'd be interesting to see what other municipalities have. I know other municipalities do have goals. This is not a new concept, so it'd be interesting to look around and see what others have as targets. We used to be 20. We're certainly lower than that. It'd be interesting to maybe have a goal to at least get us to above the 20% line. I know the watershed recommends 30. That's a little bit high, I think. We want to set some reasonable goals. I think included in this, there should be somewhat of a strategy. Yes, here's a number, but how can we achieve that? I know currently for every ash borer cut, we plant another tree. So maybe we should be cutting one and plant, so instead of 1 for 1, we're planting 2 trees for every one we cut. There are all kinds of interesting ways we can address this. I do know that there are budget limitations, and right now our budget is going to dealing with the bug, the emerald ash borer situation. So maybe we start thinking about once that's done and over with, where can we be putting some of those budget dollars into continuing the tree planting and along with the budget we currently have for emerald ash borer. So. Anyway, I hope that everyone supports the deferral and hope that administration has great conversations with the RSCA in the coming weeks, and we see a great report.
Thank you, Councillor Abel.
Thank you.
All in favor of the deferral? Against? Carried. I'd just like to remind people that the city does have a commemorative tree program. I see the Towndros are in the audience. I know that they have planted a tree, I think, in honor of their grandson. It's a very beautiful idea, so I think we need to keep talking about that program. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
We're going to go back to consent item 7, Proclamation of Human Values Day. The recommendation is that council proclaim Wednesday, April 24th, 2019 as Human Values Day in the city of Cornwall.
Councillor Elaine McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for the opportunity to say a few words about this. And I want to thank our guests in the hall tonight for bringing this forward. This is new, and I have to say I looked over it very closely, wondering what the hidden agenda was, and satisfied myself that in fact it seems to be exactly what it says it is, and it's just a call for people to contemplate human values that at a time when our world is very fractious, you know, when you consider the recent events in Sri Lanka, which are utterly tragic worldwide, and schoolyard bullying incidents closer to home. There is great need for people to take a walk tomorrow. There isn't an official walk in the city, as there is in some towns and cities, and contemplate truth, right conduct, peace, love, and nonviolence. And I thank you very much for bringing that message to us. You can see how refreshing it is to hear those words when most of the air expended here tonight is spent on sewers and sidewalks and dollars and cents and that sort of thing. But thank you for bringing this to us.
Thank you. Thank you for being in the audience, too, to support it. All in favor?
We need a second.
Oh, sorry. Seconder. Councillor Towndale. All in favor? Carried.
Tenders and requests for proposals. First tender, 19T18, supply, delivery, and training of a 3M DBI SALAG FlexiGuard supported ladder system. Recommending that this tender be awarded to Tenekip Limited from Cornwall at the total bid price of $28,497.84.
Motion by Councillor Grant, Councillor Towndale. Question, Councillor Towndale.
Just a quick question, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to confirm, I read the report. Is this the lift for Cornwall Transit that was brought up during the budget deliberations?
Madam CEO.
I'm going to redirect that question to Mr. Taff.
Mr. Tapp.
No, it isn't. This is the work on top of the
Thank you.
Okay. All in favor? Carried.
Tender 19T20, reconstruction of Sydney Street from Water Street to 4th Street and Amelia Street from 3rd Street to 4th Street, and revitalization of the Justice Building courtyard. Recommending that this tender be awarded to Cornwall Gravel Company Limited from Cornwall, excluding parts E2.9 and E6.1P at the total bid price of $3,703,919.09.
Motion. Councillor Gardner, Councillor Elaine McDonald. All in favor? Carried.
Tender 19T22, traffic control signals and electrical works at the intersection of 9th Street and Pitt Street. Recommended that this tender be awarded to JWK Utilities and Site Services Limited at the total bid price of $146,567.78.
Motion. Councillor Elaine McDonald, Councillor Grant. Questions? All in favor? Carried.
Tender 19T25, grass cutting and trimming at various City of Cornwall locations. Recommended that this tender be awarded to Clip and Trim Lawn Care, EC Works Limited, and Service Master by Fox, as outlined in this report.
Councillor McIntosh, do you want to move that? Or is it only when it's no more worries that you? Councillor McIntosh moves it, seconded by Councillor Hollingsworth. All in favor? Carried.
Tender 19T26, grass cutting at various parks within the City of Cornwall. Recommended this tender be awarded to EC Works Limited and Goshen Excavation Limited, as outlined in the report.
Councillor Elaine McDonald, you have a question?
I do.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. A question of Mr. Fothrop through you, and expect that he'd be the person I'd ask this of. does this represent the grass cutting, the parameters that we set in place last year to meet a budgetary goal of spending less money on grass cutting? So are we back to the old normal, or is this the new normal?
Through you, Madam Mayor, this is the new normal. So this
Okay.
is to maintain the same areas of grass that we were cutting last year.
And I have to say, I think it was satisfactory.
Amen.
So moved by Councillor DePel, seconded by Councillor Elaine McDonald. All in favor? Carried.
Tender 19T30, supply of labor and equipment for roadside moving, drainage ditches and water fest site. Action recommended is that this tender be awarded to Green Acres Snow Removal from Cornwall at the total bid price of $63,675.50.
Moved by Councillor Gardner, seconded by Councillor Grant. All in favor? Carried.
Tender 19T31, cleaning, flushing, and CCTV inspection of storm sewer networks. Recommending that this tender be awarded to Wessuck Incorporated from Brantford. Parts A, 1 and 2, B, 1 and 2, and D are awarded at the total bid price of $94,139.17. Parts A, 3 and 4, B, 3 and 4, and C were specified as provisional items within the tender documents and will not be awarded at this time due to budget constraints.
Moved by Councillor Hollingsworth, Councillor Elaine McDonald. All in favor? Carried.
Tender 19T33, Phase 2, roadway lighting improvements on Vincent Massey Drive between Power Dime Drive and 2200 Vincent Massey Drive. Recommended that this tender be awarded to JWK Utilities and Site Services Limited from CARP at the total bid price of $77,170.13.
Moved by Councillor Elaine McDonald, seconded by Councillor DePel. All in favor? Carried.
Tender 19T34, roadway lighting improvements on Pitt Street from 3rd Street to Water Street. Recommended that this tender be awarded to Terraflex Limited from Greeley at the total bid price of $144,468.24.
Moved by Councillor Grant, Councillor Towndale. Any questions? Can tell it's spring, eh? Lots of tenders. All in favor? Carried.
Tender 19T35, supply and crushed stone and stone dust as required. Recommended that this tender be awarded to Cornwall Gravel Company Limited from Cornwall at the total bid price of $86,999.79.
Moved by Councillor Grant, seconded by Councillor McIntosh. All in favor? Carried.
Extension of water purification plant engineering services contract. Recommended that council approve the sole source purchase for additional engineering and design consultancy services from J.L. Richards and Associates Limited from Ottawa as outlined in the background discussion section at a total cost of $178,645.09.
Moved by Councillor Gardner, seconded by Councillor Ibaya. All in favor? Carried.
Telephone replacement project. Recommend that council approve a 5-year leasing contract with Bell Canada for the delivery of Bell Total Connect within a cloud-based environment.
Moved by Councillor Bennett, seconded by Councillor Grant. All in favor? Oh, sorry, Councillor Towndale, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you, there was the on-premise solution, which was an in-house solution. There's the Bell Total Connect. Were there, this isn't a tender, this wasn't a request for proposals, but were any other options looked at?
Madam CEO.
To Mrs. Bailey, please.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, we're recommending that the award go to Bell Total Connect. We did look at other services for our telephone replacement. Bell is the only provider that offers a cloud-based system that is in line with the city's current network, and they maintain that parallel to our network. And also the city currently has Bell, so the transition itself will be seamless.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, just
Go
a
ahead.
follow-up question. Will our phone number no longer be private number? This was an issue raised at council before. when the city dials out, is this private number? It should say City of Cornwall, quite frankly. I don't know why it says private number. Is this something that will be remedied with this?
Madam CFO?
Through you, Madam Mayor, currently it says Cornwall when you're dialing out. So if I dial out, it says Cornwall on the receiving end. So we did change that within the last 6 months or so. I believe that this will be the same, but I can check into it for you.
Thank you. All in favor?
Carried.
New business.
We have two. One which was included on the agenda, so if it's okay, Madam Mayor, I'll just read the operative clause. Now therefore be it resolved that the Council of the Corporation of the City of Cornwall requests that the Minister of Children, Community and Social Services suspend implementation of its planned changes, including enhancements to the Ontario Autism Program pending meaningful consultation with a broad range of qualified stakeholders and inclusion of necessary revisions to the program to ensure that autistic children and adults receive the support they need to thrive within their communities, and that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to Premier Ford, Minister MacLeod, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and all municipalities in SDNG. And that was moved by Councillor Carolyn Hébert.
Seconded by, do we have a seconder? Councillor Elaine McDonald. Councillor Hébert, do you want to make some comments?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. This motion is really just to join the many other municipalities that are bringing this forward and passing mainly unanimously to support the many families affected by these changes. I've spoke to families in our city that who were not able to go through the intake process for the autism program, where this local mother is going to be paying upwards of $40,000 a year for therapy for her son. So this isn't just inconveniencing families. This is really impacting many households and can put many families under the poverty line just to provide the necessary therapy and services to their children and adults. So on this Autism Awareness Month, I think it is very fitting for us to support the families and their loud voices and encourage the provincial government to rethink these changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Grant and then Councillor Elaine McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I can't support this for one reason. I don't even know what the program is. I don't know enough about it. I would like to get clarification as to the changes to the old program that was introduced, because putting this forward, I'm doing that through ignorance, and maybe it's my fault because I don't go and check every change to all the changes that the Ford government's putting forward. But I can't support this because I don't understand all the changes. In my understanding, in some of it, there have been improvements, and maybe what we have to look at is maybe saying where are the deficiencies in the program, not necessarily be specific with exact ones here. And the other thing is, if it is passed, I think our MPP should be copied on this as well, if it is. But I'm not supporting it because I don't know enough about the program. I'd like to get more information.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. Councillor Elaine.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I do support this motion, and I think that the changes proposed have been drastic, and families who are most affected by the autism policy are absolutely not in favor and in support of it, so I support this motion. And I also think we should copy our MPP on the motion, but I also think we should ask the other municipalities of Ontario who will receive this, because I think that's part of the motion, this goes out to other municipalities, that they respond to us so we know. It would be nice, I think, for us to know just how universal this appeal for a cessation of these changes is. I think it's very universal. And I think that would give a sense of support to the families who were affected by this and push them to not have it take effect.
So, Madam Clerk, can you?
I will make sure that we contact our MPP as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any further comments?
Recorded vote.
Oh, Councillor McIntosh, yes?
I agree with Councillor Grant on this, and it's got nothing to do with politics at all. Although we are going down the political path here, whether this and another motion coming up. I don't know enough about it. I'm surprised that somebody's paying $40,000 a year for treatment. That's your entire income if you take it net, okay? So that I'm not aware of. I'd be voting this just to go along with the crowd. And, I just don't feel comfortable with it. The other thing this government's going through a lot of cuts, whether you like it or not. Are we going to bring motions every week about, we're opposing this government cuts? But I'm with Glenn. I'm with Glenn on this one. I'm really not informed on this, and that's maybe my fault.
Any further comments? I will say that in my life, I have a friend who is going through this, 2 children on the autism spectrum, and those numbers sound very similar to what my friend is going through. So I feel comfortable voting for this. I understand that we're in a political context, though, so I understand the comments of Councillor Grant and Councillor McIntosh. I respect, I respect that you don't feel comfortable supporting this, but I certainly do. So I'm going to call for a recorded vote. Is that it, Councillor Hébert? Recorded vote.
Councillors Claude McIntosh?
No.
Elaine McDonald?
Yes, in support.
Sid Gardner?
Yes, in support.
Dean Hollingsworth?
Yes.
Caroline Hébert?
In favor.
Councillors Maurice Dupel?
Yes, in favor.
Glenn Grant?
No.
Todd Bennett?
Yes.
Winston Towndale?
Yes.
And Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Motion is carried.
Thank you. Next item.
Now we're going to move on to the bylaws, and we'll ask for 2 separate motions. The first one will be for adoption of bylaws 2000.
Sorry, I think there was another new business item.
I'm sorry, there is. And I will read this in its entirety because it was just handed out tonight.
Okay.
Cuts to the public health units. Whereas the provincial government is cutting $200 million to public health units. Whereas the funding formula is being changed to municipalities with a population of under 100,000 residents from a 75% provincial share and 25% municipal share to a 70% provincial share and 30% municipal share for the 2019 and 2020, and a 65% provincial share and 35% municipal share in 2021 and 2022. Whereas the changes will affect the City of Cornwall's budget and ultimately the cost will be downloaded to the city taxpayers. Whereas the province is also reducing the number of health units across the province from 35 units to 10 units, which does not recognize the diversity of needs of individual health issues across the province, and effectively will lead to less input by municipalities. Now therefore be it resolved that the Council of the City of Cornwall calls upon the Ontario government to reverse the plan outlined in the 2019 budget that slashes the funding and the amount of units in the province of Ontario. Now therefore be it further resolved that this resolution be forwarded to the Premier of Ontario, the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care, our MPP, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, the Association of Municipal Managers, Clerks and Treasurers of Ontario, and l'Association Française des Municipalités de l'Ontario. And that was moved by Councillor Sid Gardner.
Seconded by?
Glenn Grant.
Councillor
Grant.
Councillor Elaine McDonald. Okay. Councillor Grant, Councillor Gardner, not Councillor Grant.
Along with you, we were at a meeting on Thursday, this
Yes.
past Thursday, when the numbers were basically given of what the reductions were. However, later in the afternoon, I spoke to some ministry people to find out what the numbers were and what the results were going to be and the impact to the municipalities. And I received some information this afternoon around 3:45, so it's written here and I want to make sure I get it right. So as the interim chair of the Eastern Ontario Health Unit, I was privy to a discussion with a representative from the province's Health and Healthcare Ministry. The new health units funding formula was rolled out as I stated in my business motion. Cornwall's cost shared amount presently is $700,000. under the youth funding rules, the city's share will be increased by $307,000 due in the 2009, 2020 year. So our budget has already been set, and it will cost us it's going to cost this city, I got 307,000, that's not right. It's got 468,000 if they roll in the childcare and youth services, and $307,000, which we didn't budget for, which we will have to pay in this year, in the 2009. These changes are being made without any consultation with the health units or to the municipalities in Ontario. And I put this forward because at the meeting and going online and checking, I'll give you examples: Niagara, St. Catharines, Ottawa, Toronto, which will end up paying $1 billion more over 10 years. They all support this type of resolution, and I hope I can get the support from us around too.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, I hope you will comment, because you were at that meeting and I thought you were very upset, so let's stay calm.
I will speak, yes. Councillor Abat first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I certainly support this motion. I know that the provincial government has also announced some infrastructure funding for hospitals to end hallway medicine. Yet they're taking away all of this money from all the preventative programs and initiatives that the health unit does. And I think if we were to focus more on preventative measures when it came to healthcare and community well-being, we wouldn't have to spend all of this money on adding more beds to hospitals. And I don't know the exact numbers when it comes to healthcare, but if you focus on early intervention and prevention, when it comes to one career criminal, you're saving the criminal justice system $2 billion versus the peanuts you're focusing on the prevention measures. So just another reason why we should be supporting our health units is the money they're saving our healthcare system, encouraging and helping people be healthier so they're not weighing a burden on the healthcare system.
Thank you. Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I had originally told Councillor Gardner I'd support this, but I did a little bit of research and phone calling, and the figures aren't totally out yet from the information I received today. So I don't know. I'm not saying they're wrong. What I'm getting are different figures, and I don't know. So I can't support this one. I'm getting conflicting information. So again, I think what we should do is research this first, because we're going to be sending something out. Maybe the information is inaccurate. So I would like to defer this until we get more clarification on these figures, because I don't know if they're accurate or not. So I can't support it, and I'll move to defer it to if I can get a seconder.
Okay. So there's a motion to defer this. Councillor McIntosh supports the motion to defer. Debate on the motion to defer. Councillor McIntosh.
Through Mrs. Adams to Tracy, are we aware of the $307,000 is going to cost us more this year? Where are we going to find the money?
Madam CFO.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't have specific information at this
So
time.
nobody's told you it's going to cost $307,000?
Not directly, no.
Well, Sid Gardner just told me.
What, I know. We haven't received any official.
Okay, so we don't know, really. I'd rather wait till we find out for sure and then take some action, rather than putting something out there right now that we're not even sure of the numbers that we were just given, that may not be accurate. And where's AMO in all of this, the organization we pay this money to represent us? Have they said anything? Are they going to say anything? I'd like to know that.
Okay. Councillor Gardner may speak to that, but
Yeah,
we'll come back. We'll come back. I'll come back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth and then Councillor Elaine McDonald.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just one point of, order on the motion. Traditionally speaking, new business isn't something that we make a decision on. Traditionally speaking, new business goes to administration for a report. Administration provides some kind of input or something official, and then we as a council decide on whether we're in favor of it or opposed, based on whatever information our duly paid administrators can sniff out.
May I ask
So-
Madam Clerk to respond to that
Just
point?
Okay, go ahead.
Through you,
Councilor
Madam
Hall.
Mayor. New business motions are traditionally changes that you want to see within a municipality, and you're looking for a report. You're right, it goes to administration.
Right.
The other option of a new business motion is to take a political stance by council. So this would fit that
Also, this
criteria.
does fall in keeping.
It does.
Stands to reason. Thank you for the correction, duly noted. That being said, I still think, aside from that, so certainly a political stand, and I would be lying if I said I'm a real champion of the provincial government and some of the initiatives they've been pitching lately, but, so it's not as though I'm opposed to what's being asked. I think, however, if we're talking about numbers, there seems to be a little inconsistency. And so I could still potentially support the motion in future if I knew what the numbers really were. That being said, I'll support the motion to refer to administration so that when I'm standing here saying I'm opposed or in favor, I know exactly what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Councillor Elaine McDonald, and then Councillor Morris DePel.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I don't support the motion to defer, and I'm very comfortable supporting the original motion. I think that the announcements we've had haven't been in the kind of detail maybe that some people are comfortable getting, but when we know that we're being promised better services for autism, better education, I mean, bigger classes make for resilient kids. This is good for the world. And land ambulances, services being drastically cut, health units being cut, library networks cut 50%. So let me tell you, yes, they're saying it's going to be better, but if it costs less, it's going to be less. And I don't expect it to be better. So I certainly support the original motion. I do not support the motion to defer.
Councillor Morris DePel.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was going to ask through you to Ms. Bailey's if we did have confirmation on those numbers. So I certainly don't support, but she answered that through Councillor Grant. I certainly don't support the cuts that are being proposed, but I certainly would, like some of my colleagues, like to be able to vote on this, knowing that those numbers are impacting us this year rather than not having anything concrete. We know that autism isn't affecting our budget, so voting as we did for autism is sending a statement out there on behalf of the municipality, but I would hate to send a statement out on behalf of the municipality with incorrect information or not updated information. So not that I will not support it in the future when it comes back to us, but I will support the deferral.
Any further comments? Councillor Gardner, do you want to wrap up?
Well, dealing with the numbers, it took 4 days for me to get them, and there were millions of dollars here and there, stuff that I didn't want to deal with because it doesn't apply here. The $307,000 was the CFO of the health unit who broke down the numbers, and Dr. Paul called me this afternoon at 3:45 and said, those are the exact numbers, 307,000 and 468 if the children's services are cut also, is it part of the portion? I don't know what else I can say except these numbers to me are fact and they're not pulled out of the air. I don't know where you got your numbers for, but I waited 4 days to get them. And this to me is the actual numbers that we're going to be ending up paying. That's the bottom line. I'm not going to argue or debate with the CFO of the health unit after he worked on this for 2 days. And I stand with the numbers that I've put forward, and it'll come later on, you'll find out that these numbers were correct.
So I'm going to vote against the deferral. I sit on the board with Councillor Gardner, so I feel more comfortable. It's, you know, I've had a meeting. Councillor Gardner said I was upset. I was, in the sense that, and I don't worry so much about bigger cities. They can deal with what they're dealing with. But in smaller centers, and particularly our region, when you have a rural component, when you have a smaller center, the health unit plugs in gaps along the way. And so cuts to the health unit in this region are much more impactful for us because we rely on the health unit for those gaps. So for me, that was compelling. I feel comfortable with that. I will not vote for the deferral, but certainly if it is deferred, I'm sure it will come back and we will respond to the issues raised by Councillors Grant and DePel and McIntosh. So I'm sure this will come before us again, but let's call the vote on the deferral. All in favor of the deferral? Carried?
Yeah.
Against? Okay, carried. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
Now we'll move on to the bylaws. So we're looking for two motions. The first one will be to approve bylaws 2019-43 to 48 inclusive, listed on the agenda, be taken as read and passed.
Moved by Councillor Hébert, seconded by Councillor DePel. All in favor? Carried.
Acting Mayor Grant?
Councillor Grant? Yes.
Next bylaw.
The addition of bylaw 49 this evening is to appoint Naresh Bhargava, Wes Libby, Rachel Poirier to the Election Audit Compliance Committee.
Motion. Councillor Hebert and Councillor McDonald. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Just boot right through that. Have us out of here in half an hour. Game's over.
Yeah, it's over.
Madam Clerk?
We have no notices of motion, and we are looking for a motion to, that council receive the unfinished business listed for April 23rd, 2019.
Councillor Hébert? Oh, Councillor Elaine McDonald?
Did we skip the reports from standing special
Yes,
committees?
we did. My apologies.
We'll put that on hold, Councillor Hébert. Councillor Elaine McDonald?
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor. There are two events that I'd like to tell everybody about and invite everybody to. The first one is the Quilts on the Seaway show at St. John's Church this Friday and this Saturday. And our own Denise LaBelle-Gélina is one of the artists who have made some of the quilts that will be on display. This organization, they've been producing quilt shows like this for 25 years, and unfortunately they don't have a home that they can stay in for longer than 2 days for the show because obviously the church has to revert to regular use on the Sunday. And through their work, this Quilts on the Seaway has been supporting hospice, Habitat, Baldwin House, and as well as bringing a show of tremendous beauty to the community. So I urge everybody to go. And the second thing is this Friday at 11:45 at the Injured Workers Monument in Lamoureux Park, the Labour Council is holding a ceremony to remember workers who were killed or injured on the job. And once again, everybody is invited to attend. And this year it's special because it's an anniversary for Darby Bergen, who was our MP in the late 19th century, and it's his face that's actually the main plaque on the monument. And he was a local medical doctor who got into politics, and as a doctor he was utterly appalled by the number of times he had to try to put children's bodies back together again because of what they suffered in the mills in Cornwall. So he brought in the first workplace safety legislation in Canada, and we honor him for that. And we'll be the SD&G Highlanders, to which regiment he also belonged. He was a very multi-talented man. They will be there. In fact, it's Bill Beattie who's going to be giving the keynote address. And we'll also have an address on the same occasion by our own professional firefighter, Jason Kreitz, who will be speaking about the some of the hidden dangers in the workplace. For example, chemical dangers that people can encounter when they're unseen and unanticipated, but frequently lead to death and disability. And there's some of the things that workers together have to work together to mitigate the worst effects of those things. So 11:45, Lamoureux Park at the Workers' Monument. Everybody is welcome. And there's lunch afterwards in the wing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McDonald. I will attend both those events.
Thank you.
Councillor Abad.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to make everybody aware about a Earth Day event hosted by the Raisin Region Conservation Authority happening this Saturday, 10 a.m. At their beautiful location on the waterfront. They'll be giving away 2,000 trees, so we can all do our part and plant a tree. Those usually run out, so line up at 10. They'll also be selling some larger potted trees. There'll be a free barbecue and cake, and I believe vendors, and there's a group hosting a cleanup, what do you call it? A shoreside cleanup.
Okay.
So if you want to participate in that, you can.
Where's the cake?
The cake is at the Raisin Region Conservation Authority.
Okay, thank you.
It's free. There's trees too.
Yes.
But trees
Sorry,
and cake,
yes.
all great things. But everyone is welcome to just go down, celebrate Earth Day, and if you can't make it there, grab a bag and clean up your street, because we can all do a little bit to make a big impact to clean up our city. Thank you.
Merci. Any other reports? Councillor Towndale?
I think we should have a motion to adjourn.
What's the score, Councillor
3-1.
Towndale? 3-1.
Not the right team.
Any other reports from standing committees? Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Now we'll move on to the pending business listing. And we're looking for a motion to receive the unfinished business listed for April 23rd.
Councillor Hébert, seconded by Councillor Bennett. Councillor Hébert?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. During budget consultation, we discussed adding some public recycling in the city, which is really exciting, and I know there's some work happening on that. I'm wondering if we could put it on the unfinished business listing so that we sort of look forward to having a report back on that, on the rollout, the implementation, so that we can have some more detail where the money is coming from, et cetera, and so that, at future meetings we can have sort of a goal date.
More detail?
Absolutely.
Madam CEO?
Excellent.
We'll put that on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McIntosh?
Oh, is it just one of you setting a date to put that on? Just to be decided.
Yeah, it's probably going to be in the next, yeah. Probably within the next, I'm going to say 60 days, because we'll probably try to, we want to try and get it probably started for the summer.
Beauty.
Councillor Elaine McDonald?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And if I can just piggyback on Councillor Hebert's comments, I know I've received a lot of calls from people who are just confused about solid waste. I know Councillor Grant's actually put out a call for specific instances. And I want to say that I called the solid waste number today, and I got Danielle Watson, who said that very soon there's going to be published in the ad bag
Yes.
a little booklet of the new rules and the dates and that sort of thing. So in the next couple of weeks, don't throw out your ad bags. Like, look through them. There's a little gold mine in there, the kind of information that I know I've received a lot of calls for. So it's coming soon.
There's a plug.
Councillor Gardner?
I don't know who to ask about this, but they came by with one truck to pick up my garbage last week, one bag. I had 8 bags of leaves, picked that up, and a little pocket of branches, which were picked up in my property. Another truck came by for that. So I'm wondering why there are 3 trucks doing what 2 trucks could do. I mean,
So,
I looked out the window and I saw the 3rd truck show up to pick up a little bundle of branches. Why weren't they picked up with the leaves?
Councillor Gardner, I don't know if there's a quick answer to that. There is. Mr. Goodwin? Can you come to the mic, please? It's out of order of the schedule, but I'm allowing it because it's top of mind.
Sir, through you, Madam Mayor, we have 2 contractors for 3 different streams. So we have the new contractor E360 that picks up the solid waste and then picks up the recycling, and the leaf and yard waste just started with HGC, and that just started this week. And so that 3rd group is who picked up your the branch bundles. We may have accidentally sort of in the process, and I'll follow this up with Danielle, the bag, the leafed bag, might have looked like garbage as opposed to looking like it should have been picked up with the bundle of branches.
So it was an error, that's. I
That
just-
part, but yes, that part was an error. But we do have that three separate trucks for those 3 separate streams. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you.
It does. Thank you.
Crazy. We voted for it. 9 minutes. We approved it.
All right. We have it, we have a mover and a seconder.
We do.
All in favor? Carried? Sort of carried. All in favor?
Yeah, we're here.
All right. Almost done, folks.
Carried-ish.
Carried-ish.
We are looking for a motion for the confirming bylaw.
Counselor Grant, Counselor Bennett, comments? All in favor? Carried. Motion to adjourn.
Hey.
Counselor Hébert and Counselor McDonald. All in favor? Merci tout le monde.
Our next meeting will be held on Monday, May 13th.
You don't have to apologize.